All right, welcome to this episode, broadcasting live again from sunny New York. I am very, very lucky to be in the presence of Emily Parker today because we met recently at South by Southwest Festival. We did a panel on blockchain tech, and I am so excited to welcome you to the show. How are you doing today? You good?
Great, yeah. I interviewed you. Now you're interviewing me.
So yeah, the roles are reversed.
Exactly.
I get my revenge
Comes full
now.
circle.
You did such a great job on that panel, and I've done some digging online about you and your life, and you have done so much, and there's so much to talk about. I always like to start these by giving you a bit of an opportunity to give people who are listening a bit of a breakdown about your history and the stuff you've been up to.
Sure. Okay. So where do I start?
It's a big question. I mean, you've done so much. Let's start around the kind of journalistic work, the kind of what brought you into web3. Just have at it.
Okay, sure. I'll try to keep this relatively concise. So I started out as a journalist. I started out at the Wall Street Journal, actually, and I was writing a column about China and the internet, basically looking at how ordinary citizens were using the internet to get around controls, to get around political controls. Because as many people know, China has state media and they censor a lot of information, but the internet was like a way to get around that. So that's how I kind of got into the China tech thing. And I've been doing Chinese for a really long time. I started Chinese in high school. So that was kind of the through line. And then I started looking at that question okay, so the internet and social media is a way for people to sort of get around government control. It's probably not only happening in China, it's probably happening in a lot of other countries. So I started looking at Cuba, at Russia, and I wrote a book looking at that exact topic, how ordinary citizens in China, Cuba, and Russia were using the internet and social media to basically either fight for change or just get out the truth or communicate with each other. So that was a very big project. Now, during that time, I did a bunch of other things. I worked briefly at the State Department, at the U.S. government, also on the Internet Freedom Agenda. So that's we can get into that. It's a whole other thing. And I did two startups. One was a social media startup and one was a blockchain startup based in Asia. And for how I got into Web3, so for me, I was always really interested in this idea of decentralized technology and the power of decentralized technology. So, here's the internet, and, now everybody kind of hates social media, right? It's really popular to talk about how annoying social media is, and I get that. But when you're in a country where the government has always had sort of the final say and there's one version of the truth, social media really was a game-changing thing in places like this. And it was something that no matter how hard authorities try, they never could completely control it, because that's the thing. It's social media is not one place. It's many different platforms. It's many different voices. So cryptocurrency is a very similar concept, right? Except it's not information, it's money. It's decentralized money. And so, with the internet, you have information that can't be totally controlled by the government. And with cryptocurrency, you have money that can't totally be controlled by the government. And so I got interested in it when I saw that cryptocurrency was starting to boom in China and the Chinese government was getting nervous. I was like, wow, I've totally seen this story before. This really reminds me of the internet. And that's kind of I was really interested in that tension.
And that also brought you into what you do with CoinDesk.
Yes. Right. So first I was I co-founded a blockchain startup based in Asia and was there for a while and then went to CoinDesk from there.
Because my introduction to you, obviously on the BCL panel at South by, there were so many questions and things that we just skimmed over the surface of. I thought I need to sit down with Emily Parker and start to dig into a few of them. I feel like there couldn't be a better time to be having the conversation about Web3, especially when it comes to financial international movements. And I try my best to stay as far away from politics as I can in general, but I can't help but ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
And I'm going to start by one which is maybe a little basic, but I want to do that because it's a very common question that I had in Discord before this interview. So you're very well traveled and you understand the differences in cultures more than most, which is fair to say. You spent a lot of time in China, you speak many languages, you understand what's happening in Russia at the moment, you've got a good idea of the political infrastructure. Now, a common question that I'm asked about cryptocurrencies is, if cryptocurrencies are decentralized, it's just money that people trade in a way that doesn't have a centralized entity, there's this idea that people go, well, a government who owns a fiat currency, dollars or pounds or whatever, that government has little control levers. Mm-hmm. They can change interest rates, or they can augment variables within that currency that keep it safe, or at least people are led to believe. So whether you look at the printing of the US dollars, or changing lending rates in the UK, or whatever it is, people kind of, if I was to distill this question, they go, isn't it bad that those control levers, those abilities to change elements of the currency, if they're taken away and it's just left to people, is that not going to end in a bad situation? Are the control levers not a good thing? Just playing devil's advocate?
That's a great question. We're getting right into it. It's a great question. It's a hard question. Well, first of all, the assumption, if we're saying like, isn't it bad that cryptocurrency is going to shake up the system, sort of assumes that the system is working, right? And, I think like we come from countries where, people have problems with America's monetary policy, or I don't know, but it's not necessarily, people aren't, I don't know if people are really up in arms about it, right? So, cryptocurrency was born after the 2008 financial crisis, where, the creator of Bitcoin was like, this isn't working. Like, this system isn't working. So it actually, in some ways, like, that was a little bit of the intent. Not to mean that, like, governments don't have any control over, monetary policy anymore, but just to give people a little bit more control over their own money. And the idea behind it then was this idea that, and we're seeing this now, right, all over the world, is that, in theory, a government can just print money indefinitely, right? And when they print money, the value of the money goes down. It's, inflation, and in some countries, hyperinflation, right? And so the idea of Bitcoin, which has a fixed supply, is that it's supposed to be sort of a hedge against inflation. Now, whether it is or not is still like remains to be seen. I think in the US, we're only really starting to, like, a lot of us are only really starting to feel inflation for the first time. But in other countries, that's another thing. Like, you have to kind of take this out of the US context, right? Like, if you're in a country with like hyperinflation, like some countries in Latin America, for example, like Bitcoin is a store of value, right? I mean, these cryptocurrencies are protecting your savings in a way that your national currency is not. So like so less like, yes, there is a concern about it shaking up monetary policy in a bad way, but it also can protect citizens from monetary policy that's not working, right?
I guess especially if they're from a nation that is utilizing US dollars, but the printing of money doesn't affect the nation that you're in. If I got that right? Because that seems to be a no-brainer in terms of a system that doesn't function.
Well, or even if you just look at countries where Bitcoin has, gotten a real following, a country like Venezuela, a country like Argentina. I mean, these are countries that are just battling inflation, right? And so, people, you're seeing it all over the world. I mean, I think sometimes like, at least here in the US, like people don't really feel that. They're not like, yes, there's inflation now and it's become a big topic, but I don't think people are worried, like really seriously worried that their savings are going to evaporate or be useless in a year. Like in some countries, like inflation is so real, and it's so tangible. And so people are like, where do I put my money? It might not be that easy to get dollars. It might not be that easy to get another currency. So Bitcoin kind of serves that purpose, Or say you're in a country, for example, where you're in the political opposition, right? And at any moment in time, you feel like the government can just like seize your bank account or just, prevent you from taking your money out of the country. I think Bitcoin can serve that purpose. So what you're saying actually is very valid and it's a concern. And that's why governments all over the world are concerned about it. But there's like another side of it too, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I'm playing devil's advocate. A lot of my listeners know that I've really been involved in Web3 quite deeply. I love the concept of it. I think if I was going to gamble my money, I'd prefer it to be given to people in a completely free, kind of unpoliced market. Than hoping that there's a few people at the top of a financial team in the government are going to what's the best way of putting this? Give actions that are for the best interest of the people, really.
Right.
So I think that, and another swing for you maybe more is like, do you see any negatives in removing these control levers of a traditional governmental monetary system? Is there anything that you're worried about? You're a lot more kind of clued into this space. Is there any warning flags that you go, Bitcoin's great, but what about this?
I guess we're not really at that point yet, or even close to that point where I see like Bitcoin really threatening the monetary system, at least of the United States, right? So it seems kind of far off, like where it's one or the other. And I think, the governments all over the world are putting a lot of like regulations in place. So I guess like it's hard for me to imagine a point where Bitcoin is like shaking up monetary policy to such a degree that the government loses control. But yeah, I mean, could that be problematic? Like absolutely. But I think we're pretty far from that happening.
The best timing for this conversation is what you say about the idea of freezing assets. You know, I like whether you're talking about art, which is my background, and music, this ability to create assets, monetize them, own them yourself, not need to be beholden to a record label, etc. Right up the chain when we're talking about international policy, we're talking about seizing of assets from people in other countries. Right now, we have an international crisis going on, and it seems like a good thing that all of these financial sanctions and these, taking away off yachts from oligarchs and stuff, it seems initially like a good thing that we have the ability to do that. But Web3 really questions that now, because one of the really hot topics at the moment is going, is Web3 good or bad when it comes to international conflict at the level that we're seeing right now?
Sure. So the sanctions thing is a real question. I mean, this is a really popular talking point, both in the US and Europe. You're hearing this where, lawmakers and policymakers are saying, wait, like, what's the point of these sanctions if people can just if Russians specifically can just use cryptocurrency to get around them? Now, this is kind of a controversial point because a lot of people in the cryptocurrency industry would say that that's not really happening to any significant effect. And this is just sort of
what's not happening?
The sanctions evasion. And the reason why it's not happening is because, contrary to sort of popular opinion, Bitcoin is not just this like murky pool of dark money where, nobody knows where it's going and you can't see it going from A to B. Bitcoin is traceable to a certain degree, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole idea of it. So there's this kind of paradox in Bitcoin where that like people are like, oh, it's like, it's for freedom. It's like, it's for, relatively anonymous transactions. But in reality, transactions are recorded, right? I mean, that's part of Bitcoin. And so we've seen in some like very high profile hacks or crimes, that money has been able to be found because law enforcement has basically traced it, I
remember, I heard an interview, I can't remember the woman's name. It was a forensic accountant for, I think, the FBI, explaining that crypto is like a dream come true for a forensic accountant because every transaction from the start has been recorded. And
it's definitely better than cash. It's definitely better than cash. And so, you will hear law enforcement saying things like that. They're like, oh, we're glad it's cryptocurrency because we can trace it. Now, is it easy to trace? No. Like, do you need to have some skill and time? Yes. Is it possible? Absolutely. Right. And so that's the thing. Like, can potentially Russians use cryptocurrency for sanctions evasion? Maybe, but like it seems more likely it would be in relatively small amounts as opposed to like transferring massive funds from one country to another. That just doesn't seem that feasible. The other thing is like you have to think about the endpoint, right? So it's like, say, somebody is trying to like move crypto from one country to another. At some point, they're going to have to put that crypto into some sort of fiat currency. And that's where you hit a lot of regulations because it's not that easy to do that, again, at large scale without some sort of like KYC, know your customer. So I think for sanctions evasion, obviously, this conflict is relatively new, but like at least what a lot of people are saying is that right now, we don't really have evidence that this is happening at scale just because of the nature of crypto. It's not really that practical a way to get around sanctions.
It's tough to deal with that double-edged sword because on the one end, you see Zelensky in Ukraine raising huge amounts of money through NFTs, through crypto donations. Right. And it's a beautiful thing to see this idea that people will dictate the flow of support.
Sure.
And every cell in an organism of thinking beings are going to be able to support the side which they believe is most righteous. And I guess my worry is then, well, what's the other side of that coin? And what's happening behind the scenes at the moment? And it's actually kind of hard to tell right now.
Well, I'm really glad that you're asking these questions. I think they're so important. And like, even when you look at like Ukraine, right? Like, I feel like they've raised some crazy amount of money, like over $100 million in cryptocurrency, right? This is like a totally new era in conflict that can be done. But like, let's just like think about this for a second. Like, okay, yeah, here again in the US, and sorry to be speaking from a US centric point of view, but like, a lot of people are for this, right? They think this is great. But by that same, but what if like $100 million were being raised for a cause that like less people were in support of, right? What if it was for something that was like, what if it was for a government that was doing something really bad? Or
what if it's happening right now? We just don't know about it because our press isn't reporting it. And
And, right? Or like, what if Russia was doing that, right? I mean, like the same thing. Like, what if Russia started a campaign to raise $100 million? Would people be as supportive of that? Would people think crypto was great? I mean, it's still the same tool. So I think this is really an important point, because it's like people tend to like these technologies when they're doing things that are like they support, but like the technology itself is neutral, and so it could be used by any side, and that's just a fact, right? It's not like this inherently like good peace-loving thing. It's something that could be used by any side, and this is something and this is where the social media debate comes back in again.
I was just going to say, this is what makes me think about how you were approaching this from, rewind us a little bit and take us into how you felt when you saw social media developing and taking on steam.
Sure, it's a great question. So so look at social media, right? Now like social media in general, it's really like trendy to like hate on social media, right? Like everyone just thinks social media is, destroying democracy. I'd say that in some ways is like a prevalent narrative. But it wasn't always like that, right? I mean, if you rewind, say, like a decade and you go back to around the Arab Spring, the narrative was completely different, right? I mean, the Arab Spring, the narrative was like social media starts revolutions, like, this government, the Egyptian government was in power for decades and nobody could do anything. And then thanks to Facebook, like there was a revolution. That was, and everybody was so excited at that point. And like to a degree, like that was true. I mean, like Facebook didn't start the Egyptian revolution, but it definitely played a major role. There's there's no part of like historical revisionism that can change that. It definitely played a major role. However, people weren't very happy with how it turned out, right? I mean, like, I think like, just because social media helped overturn a government in Egypt doesn't mean that it put in a government or put in a system that people were happy with, right? So I'd say that was like the beginning of people's sort of like disappointment about it, And I think also...
And forgive me for my poor understanding of history. What was it about the result that people weren't happy about when it came to...
Well, I think it's people just felt that like Egypt didn't, miraculously become this like peaceful democratic place that, and it was kind of just like people's expectations for social media were just way too high. Like who said that was going to happen anyway? Like that was the problem. It's like people had such high hopes for this, right? And it was very effective in sort of like bringing down a government. It turned out to be a lot less effective in creating a new one, that people thought was what people wanted, right? And then what happened is, some of the things that were great about social media ended up being kind of like a liability, because one of the great things about social media is that it's like leaderless and decentralized and there's no like hierarchies, at least supposedly. Again, very useful for bringing down a government, not useful for creating a new government, then you get sort of chaos. So I'd say like that was where the turning point began. And then again, it's like the same thing that you just said about crypto. It's like people love social media and they love crypto when they feel like it's bringing a result that they like. But then like, I mean, for example, again, a really good example here in the US is Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump used social media very, very effectively, right? I mean, he was like the king of Twitter for a while, now he's off of Twitter, but he was very effective at social media. I mean, that was legitimately true. Whatever you think about him, he was like, this medium really was good for him, right? I mean, he's like, the short sound bites and like he was legitimately, skilled at using social media, I'd say. And so all these people, again, who like loved social media when they thought that it helped like Obama become president, all of a sudden like really didn't like the idea that it could also help Donald Trump become president. But it's just the same tool, And so I think like there's been a lot of things like this. And then, more sort of obvious examples would be like, people being like, oh, wait, like terrorists use social media too, I mean, that's like, something that people kind of figured out. And so we went from this like one extreme of people being like, social media is so great, it's going to like start revolutions, to people being like, social media is so bad, like terrorists use it and like governments we don't like use it. And it's just, it's just misplaced expectations. And sometimes I worry a little bit that something similar will happen in crypto as well, because people like don't learn from history. And I just sometimes hear people talking about crypto like it's like this world-saving thing. And I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, again, it's a tool and a tool can be used in many different ways. And are there many like really cool, good ways that crypto is being used? Sure. But could like bad actors use crypto? Absolutely. You know what I mean? And I think like when we start seeing more examples of that, there's going to be a lot of disappointment.
It makes me think of where we're at with NFTs. On the panel we did the other week, that was same response. It was like NFTs are a tool, and the good and the bad will be brought with that tool. People will use it for rug pulls. They'll be ripping people off. They'll be, but then there's the other part of it where artists can make a genuinely amazing living, and it can support people that never would have had a chance to have a career before. So I hear that in a big way. And what's the main parallel that you draw when you think about what happened with social media, the excitement, the adoration for it, and the way that it turned. Do you basically feel like that's where we are now coming into the crypto space?
I feel like we haven't learned enough from the past, basically. Like, I feel like we should look back and be like, hey, remember when everyone was so excited about social media and thought it was a tool for good and thought it was going to bring down governments? Like, I just sometimes hear like similar rhetoric about crypto, and I just feel like those people are going to be in for a pretty big disappointment, you know? And that doesn't mean
and that's like a solidified viewpoint for you that it is going to be a disappointment. Like,
I think if you think that crypto is just inherently like a force for good and a force for revolution and a force for like democratization, then yeah, you'll probably be disappointed. Like, I think it has those attributes, but I think it can be used in different ways as well. And like, one of the things that I find most interesting that's happening right now, and again, I saw this with social media, is like this battle for control between people and the governments. Like, governments want in on the action too, right? All over the world. Like, not only are they trying to regulate crypto, you know, they're also trying to issue, for example, central banks digital currencies. I don't know if you know about these, but like,
well, we have like the Britcoin thing to come out.
Right.
I like what I hear what you mean about New York radiators.
Yeah,
now.
this is like atmosphere. Yeah,
this is the thing. New York radiators, they just click like this. Sorry if you're listening, you can hear a banging. It's just the radiators kicking off. But yeah, we have a Britcoin literally being made right now, and it seems that every bank in Europe and every government are looking to legislate now, and it feels like a good thing for the space in general to have this legislation. But it does beg the question. It's like, well, is this going to be a bit of a step backwards? I don't know.
It's just a different animal, right? I mean, like, the most advanced on this is China, and China has.
But sorry to cut you off there. You say the most advanced is China, yet they're banning digital currencies?
Well, so they're doing two things that are so yes, they are banning many aspects of cryptocurrency. There are still some things you're allowed to do, but they've come down on it pretty hard because this is a currency that they cannot control. At the same time, they are issuing a central bank digital currency, which is totally different from Bitcoin. So they're two separate things. Like, Bitcoin is this decentralized thing, like off the government's radar. The CBDC, the central bank digital currency, is basically a digital version of China's pre-existing currency, and it's issued by the government, and it can be tracked. And so it's causing a lot of controversy because like it's highly trackable, right? Which is, you know, again, Bitcoin, you know, is trackable to a certain degree, but it's not supposed to be like the government is like can see all of your transactions.
Yeah, I hear.
So like philosophically, it's kind of the opposite of Bitcoin, you know, and this is something that China has already sort of, at least, you know, it was used at the Olympics, you know, so, and it's not just China. There's like close to 90 countries that are looking at doing this. The US is still on the fence, partly because of the privacy concerns. They're like, you know, this is, how do you do this and not have it be like totally trackable by the Fed? But yeah, so like, again, like this is like, but again, I would argue that these central bank digital currencies are not really cryptocurrency. They're a whole different thing. They're a whole different beast.
Yeah, it feels strange to me. Because it feels to me like someone sitting on the fence going, people want crypto. They want to have this. They want to have this freedom. Let's go and create it. And they're chasing the tail of this beast that's like a decade ahead of them. And they're hoping that people are going to use it. I guess they're going to force people to use it. But you know,
there's ways to compel them to use it. Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. But I find it interesting to learn a little bit more about the position of China, because from my experience, not having much visibility, to be completely honest, about the you know, inner workings of China, from the outside looking in, it looks like they're very against cryptocurrency, very against digital assets, very against this whole movement that's happening. But I guess that's not 100% the case.
They're not into it. They're wary of it, right? I mean, so China, you know, which is kind of where I've like probably the cryptocurrency market I probably know, you know, the best. China. China crypto was booming in China, right? And that made authorities nervous. And they made authorities nervous for various reasons, some of which were legitimate. I mean, so, you know, there was like a huge ICO boom in China, initial coin offerings. I'm sure you remember those. Those were basically where like a startup would fundraise using tokens, but like they could fundraise for kind of anything, you know? And so I think the Chinese government...
They could fundraise for Mark Coin.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And so I think the Chinese government was super nervous, like, you know, that all these ordinary people would like lose their savings. And like, that was kind of a legit concern. Like ICOs in China were problematic. So in 2017, they first clamped down on ICOs. They were like, no more ICOs. And they were like really hardcore about that. And it was like, okay. But then they also, you know, became concerned about trading in general. And, you know, there's various reasons for it. I mean, China has capital controls. That's one of them. There's a limit to how much you can take out of the country. So I think they were concerned about crypto being used for that purpose. Yeah, so China, it's pretty hard right now to, and they last year as well, they've been kind of increasing their control over this area. I mean, there are still people in China who will find ways to do it. It's not like it's completely blacked out, but yeah, I mean, it's something they've definitely been super wary of. So,
and I guess this is similar in a way to the reference you keep bringing us back to with social media. There's same thing in China, particularly. They tried to ban these things. They were worried about the kind of dissemination of information. Sure. And it's basically like playing this whole thing out again, which is why I think I'm so fascinated by your viewpoint. Yeah. Because, as you take us through where Web3 is going now, and bearing in mind, all of these bans essentially got lifted at some point down the line. Like, where do you think this is all going for both America and China? Where do you what disparity do you think is going to end up?
I mean, I think you're right. I think it will start looking a lot like the internet. Like, China kind of has its own internet, right? I mean, so that's what China did, which in some ways was like, I mean, they crack down on, Twitter, Facebook, Google. But what they did was they kind of replaced them. Like China has a very, very, very active social media culture, but they're Chinese brands, right? And so in a weird way, I mean, maybe that's a little bit what they're trying to do with crypto. It's like, okay, we're going to make it really hard to trade Bitcoin, but use this instead, like use our own digital currency, So I think there's a world in which, like China could just sort of be on its own different system. However, I mean, one of the good things about Bitcoin is that it is resistant against that to a certain degree. Like, I mean, China can't shut down Bitcoin entirely. It's just not possible, right? I mean, they would have to just sort of like shut down the entire internet. I mean, they're not going to do that, right? So, I think what China's done is it's like raised the barrier to entry, like in a very significant way, but it's not like impossible to, get Bitcoin in China.
But it is illegal right now.
Well, there's certain things that are illegal. Like, so China has clamped down on like certain types of exchanges, again, on ICOs, but it's not like just like holding Bitcoin itself.
That's not illegal.
No, I don't believe so. Yeah.
That's interesting. I guess this is why it's good to talk to people and actually learn the facts. As far as I was concerned, it was completely banned, illegal, can't do anything in Bitcoin or cryptos in China. And that's the other thing that I find interesting about this space is the second there's a problem with one ecosystem, you could just make another one. Like I joke about Mark Coin all the time, like especially if I'm talking or explaining something about NFTs or currencies. It's like anyone can make a coin that does anything.
That's right.
You could even just build it on top of Ethereum, make a layer 2 solution on something, and
NFTs are huge in China,
But I guess if NFTs are huge in China, like I see cryptocurrency and NFTs as almost being one and the same thing. It's the trading of the digital asset. Right. So I don't understand how that can be so big and supported and legal.
It's a little bit different. Like the sort of NFT culture in China is a little bit different. So for example,
But it's still a trade of value and money, no, essentially?
Well...
And between nations, because you talk about your capital controls. It's like, if you're sitting on like a CryptoPunk or a Bored Ape or whatever, and you're trading these NFTs, that can be millions and millions of dollars coming in and out of the country. So I guess... that's where I find it a little bit hard to get my head around.
Well, China also has its own version of NFTs as well. So, for example, like there's a service called like the blockchain. I think it's the Blockchain Services Network, BSN, which is kind of like they're NFTs, but they're more of the permissioned variety than of the sort of like totally decentralized public variety.
What do you mean by permissioned?
Like the sense that they can like disable an NFT if it's like in somehow critical of the government or something like that.
Yeah, but I guess that's such a strange one because that's
it's very strange. It's very strange, but it's a very different kind of.
So that's like being in a system where you could go, okay, so I bought this NFT for $50, and then a couple of years later it's worth like 20 million. But then someone in the government goes, actually, we've decided that doesn't fit our like narrative, so we're gonna just like disable that. Like, how would people feel comfortable investing or trading in a platform where it can just be pulled from under your feet?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe the majority of NFTs that are being traded don't fall into that category. So people aren't, it's really interesting. It's something that I definitely want to learn more about. But that's the thing. I mean, China has this way of doing things in its own way, and sort of by its own rules. And it's very different from how we think of NFTs.
It's like, I mean, a slight kind of sidestep on that kind of China situation, but I don't know if you're aware of that scam that happened with the Bored Ape Yacht Club through OpenSea. And one of the debates I've been having, I say this often because I jump on Discord before these interviews and I always ask people, I'm like, what do you want to know? And one of the questions was whether or not these marketplaces, similar to what we talk about with the Chinese government, it's like, should marketplaces have the ability to rectify or, change hands of NFTs or refund if there's been a hack? Should they even be able to? Because the whole pretense of this is that if you're operating on the blockchain and you're making your transactions, there's no middleman, there's no one controlling it, no one can take your stuff away from you. Should we even allow third-party places like OpenSea to go and make these changes? Because surely the reason why everyone's buying into the system is the absolute freedom and the absolute free market nature of this system. And it's like, if you make a mistake, if you get scammed, it's fundamentally your fault, and you can't go to someone for help. Do you see what I mean? That's a really interesting debate for me. I'd love to get your input on it.
This is such a big question, right? Because it's not just OpenSea. I mean, think about all the people that trade cryptocurrency through exchanges. Those are third parties, right? I mean, in theory, people say like, okay, you should hold your crypto in some sort of like hardware wallet, but a lot of people
I know what you mean, because it's like every time I do transactions through exchanges, that is actually in the back of my mind.
Right.
I'm thinking, what if these guys go bust? What if there's some major hack? So I make my trades, and then I'm straight out onto hardware ledgers.
But I don't know if you're representative, right? Like, I don't know the numbers of this, but I think like a lot of people, especially new users, they're like, I don't want to be responsible for my own password, because like for that, there's a certain responsibility that comes with that, which is like, okay, you lose your password, you're kind of locked out, right? There's no like customer service. And so, I think some people ironically would prefer to use these exchanges, even though they are third parties, and even though they like do, just because there's a certain amount of like perceived safety in that, or perceived security.
And you've got a customer support helpline. So I do get that. And just a quick public service announcement to everyone. It's like, if you are messing around with this, remember your seed phrase.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I tell people 1,000 times. Remember your seed phrase. Write it down somewhere safe. Don't put it on an email or don't send it to anyone, but just write it physically down. Because your seed phrase is your lock and your key for your digital wallets that hold everything. And that is the point. There's no police you can go to and say, hey, I've sent a load of money to the wrong guy. Please, can I get it back?
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're on your own. That's the point.
But that's like what's so funny, because, again, cryptocurrency is like, wow, this is so revolutionary. Like, cuts out the middleman, but like there's all these middlemen getting in now, right? I mean, it's like all these institutional players or credit card companies, because there's always going to be like that certain demographic of people who kind of want to go through like the traditional trusted channels. They're like, oh, I want to go through my bank, or I want to go through my credit card company. Like, they don't want to be out in the wild, And so that's like such a paradox of crypto, because on the one hand, it's like people are really attracted to its like rebellious nature, but for it to become mainstream, probably a lot of compromises will have to be made, right? And so we're already seeing that. Like, one of the big phrases you hear a lot in crypto is like institutional adoption. Institutional adoption is pushing up the price of Bitcoin, which is probably true to a certain degree, like Wall Street adoption, right? But it's also like, when you think about it, it's also a little bit paradoxical, because like, wasn't Bitcoin supposed to be kind of like anti-Wall Street a little bit? Like, wasn't that the point? I mean, I don't know, maybe it wasn't. I kind of thought it was a little bit supposed to be the point, right? So, but yeah.
Well, that comes down to this idea of this social organism that we're talking about. Like, I always think about us all as these little cells in this body. I think I'm stealing that from a book called The Social Organism. I read it ages ago. But one of the kind of concerns I have is, everyone made this financial system that was against Wall Street because they didn't like the idea that there was this small group of people with huge amounts of infrastructural wealth that could swing it one way or another and tank or rise the prices for their own benefit. So then the social organism comes in, and now the power of all of these cells moving together and ebbing and swaying and investing what they do, I feel like the more and more and more people that get involved with this, maybe I'm dreaming here, but the less likely that a small group of extremely wealthy people will be able to swing it. But I don't think my knowledge of financial systems is enough to know. Like, maybe you'd be able to shed some light on that, because do you feel that that when mass adoption happens and when basically everyone has some amount of Bitcoin, there's still going to be this top 1%.
The whale problem, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if it's, I don't know. But I mean, there has been the case with various coins, like this concentration of wealth problem, right? Where you've just had like, a relatively small group holding a disproportionately large amount. So yeah, it's definitely still an issue for sure. I mean, decentralization is really hard, right? I mean, there's, it's hard to do that. I mean, how do you like enforce that? Should it be, can it, or should it be enforced? So it's hard to kind of like just kind of ensure that, wealth is evenly distributed.
Well,
But so it's been a concern in the Bitcoin world for a while about, that exact concern. And also when you get these like big institutional players getting involved and, I mean, there's a lot of talk about that in crypto, like whale alerts and who are these whales, and how like, a handful of players sometimes can appear to influence the market, which, is not supposed to be like that.
But then again, I guess at least we have the visibility now. Mm-hmm. At least we can see it on the chain and we can go, okay, well, at least we know that this money's moving. Maybe it gives some better transparency. I mean, what do you think about having middlemen involved? Like, do you think that there's an important place to them, or for you, would you rather everyone just have their independent wallets and make their independent decisions?
I mean, it sort of doesn't even matter what I think, because it's like, if for Bitcoin,
of course it matters what you think. That's why you're here.
Well, what matters what I think in the sense of like regulation, because like for Bitcoin to become mainstream, like it's going to have to play by the rules to a certain degree. Like, again, this is another one of these paradoxes, right? Where it's like, so on the one hand, like it has to make people comfortable. So that people feel comfortable often with like gateways that they know and they understand, right? I mean, like if Bitcoin was still in the early days where like, it was seen as like really dark and murky, like maybe it was more like pure, but like there were also a lot less people involved and the price isn't nearly what it is today. So like, I feel like, the crypto world, they're very preoccupied with getting this sort of like, the average person involved. And the average person has like a certain comfort zone. But then there's also the regulatory, part of it, right? So like, and we see this again with the sanctions conversation. Like as long as regulators see Bitcoin as like potentially being used for criminality, potentially being used to evade regulations, like they're not going to trust it and they're going to make it really hard. You know what I mean? So it's like, again, there's just a certain compromise that's need to be reached. And that compromise is probably going to disappoint some crypto purists, right? Where they're like, wait, I have to provide all this information about myself. Like, when you, apply or to get an account on some of these exchanges, it's basically like opening a bank account in terms of like the amount of information that they want from you. And it's not like, so this idea again of Bitcoin being like anonymous is just sort of not, if you want to trade it and if you want to trade in a relatively safe way, it's quite likely that you're going to be asked a lot of personal information.
I had a conversation where someone was explaining to me that if you have Bitcoin, you can do all kinds of criminal things. And the way I was explaining it to her was to say, if you bought Bitcoin in like 2013, maybe you're not registered to a wallet. But anyone who's doing stuff on exchanges due to KYC, the Know Your Customer protocols,
exactly,
you have to give your information on. And the other thing to bear in mind is if you've got like $100 million in Bitcoin on a hardware wallet, like anonymously, you're going to buy something at some point.
Right. Well, so there you just perfectly explained the whole sanctions evision thing, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is,
when
right?
you buy that yacht or when you buy that mansion or you buy that Ferrari, it's like, well, all of the what's the best way of putting this? All of the forensic powers that be need to do is to tie the wallet address to the to the withdrawal and the purchase.
It's all about the on-ramps and the off-ramps, right? Like that's where you're going to kind of like, that's where you're going to run into the regulators. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like on the one hand, it's like, okay, this should be somewhat calming to these regulators that are always so nervous about crypto. But on the other hand, it's like, for like the crypto purists, I mean, some of them are like, wait, so if it's totally trackable and if it's not even anonymous at all, like how is this different from, anything else?
Well, I mean, think about if you want to go back in the day and get a big duffel bag with a couple of $1 million of untraced bills, then like this is,
well, you know what crypto makes me realize is just like how amazing cash is, and I don't mean like just for crime. I just mean like cash is like a truly anonymous form of money, and it's kind of the last thing out there that's like that, so I mean that's crypto isn't, and I mean it's interesting. So there are certain like innovations that are happening in the crypto world that are looking to kind of make crypto a little bit more anonymous or more private. Private is a better word than anonymous. Like, for example, like Zcash, zero knowledge proofs. Like there's some interesting...
What is zero knowledge proof? I don't understand what that
zero
is.
Knowledge proof, and I'm not going to explain this very elegantly, but the basic idea is that it's a way to sort of like verify that something is true without like revealing like sort of the identifying information, right? So it's like there's a way to like verify a set of facts without sort of like verify a set of facts without revealing the facts themselves. That's not a very good explanation. But that's the general concept.
Let me try this, because I think I understand what you mean. It's like if I'm the DVLA in the UK, which is the driving license authority or whatever, if that's my company and I have if I have like your driving license and Nathan's driving license and mine, and I know that I know everyone's info, it would be possible for someone else to be like, hey Mark, can I check that like Emily Parker is real and that her and I can be like, correct. Now that person doesn't need to know who you are to verify that you're.
That's the general idea.
So it's almost like a turnstile effect of like you can authorize that someone is being truthful about something without knowing their information.
Right, exactly. That's the right. It's without actually sending your social security number.
Yeah, I don't need to give them your driving license number. I don't need to give them your address.
But I can verify that it is what you say it is and that you are who you say you are. So I think that's a kind of a cool concept. So there's things like that ideally should be able to like make people feel more comfortable about like security without just having to like send a lot of private information. So
I kind of hear that, because it does feel weird now, doesn't it? Like I was involved in crypto before the whole like kind of KYC thing, and I had my like Bitcoin and my little hardware wallet. But now, if you're going to use one of these big exchanges, like you say, it's literally like opening a bank account.
Sure.
They're going to know everything about you. And my worry is like, which is kind of coming back to your like, I'm keen to hear your take on this, on what you see on an international scale, but I've been trying to pay my taxes. Like I've been trying to understand how it works, because my business, I have a digital agency and I'm a musician, and both are actually actively trading, paying for people and bringing in income in these digital currencies. And I'm like, look, I'm not going to be one of those people that's going to get left behind. So I'm going, look, how do we do this? And our government, our HMRC, they're just like, yeah, we don't know yet. Yeah, we don't know yet. And it's just like, well, like when are we going to know? And how are you going to? Like, do you feel that governments are going to retrospectively claim or even prosecute retrospectively on things that might have happened 5 years ago once they have the legal infrastructure to do it? Like,
interesting. Like, I mean, I guess anything is possible, right? But this is another thing, right? Like another myth about crypto where they're like, oh, you don't have to pay taxes on it, or you can get it. It's the same thing. It's like, it's not that easy, right? I mean, and governments are really catching up to this. So
I think there's going to be a lot of kids that have made a lot of money with NFTs and crypto, and they've spent it all already.
And then they're going to
have a tax bill in 5 years, and they'll be like, look, you earn like 20 million selling your like apes and your cartoon dogs, and now it's like you owe us like $200,000 in tax, and they're going to go, what?
Yeah,
my friends told me I didn't have to pay it.
Yeah,
and then it makes me worry, like what's going to happen in places like China, like Russia, in the States. Is like what kind of prosecutions are going to happen? I don't know. Scary.
Yeah, and it's like also like, where do you kind of draw that line between like, again, like making this like, acceptable and like legally acceptable and acceptable to regulators without just like kind of killing all the cool stuff about it, right? Where it's just essentially like exactly the same as everything else.
And also the key being what you just said about the legal aspect is like, you can look at, I can use myself as an example. It's just like, there are no laws yet.
Yeah.
So what am I supposed to do? There's actually no infrastructure yet. And I've dealt with other artists and other people in this space where they've got genuine like battles where people have ripped off their work. They've taken their images, they've NFT'd them, or you've got musicians where their masters are being exploited. And it's like, how do we prosecute these guys? And it's like,
yeah, that's a really good point. So I think like that's another reason why, like, even though like the legal regulatory stuff can be kind of a downer in that, like, you have to provide all this information and it's like kind of much less the Wild West. Without it, there's no way for this industry to grow, right? There's just no way. And you hear that a lot even in the US. Like the US for many years, like one of the big criticisms of regulation here was that it was like super confusing. It just because like states are all doing their own thing. There's like all these different agencies, all these different acronyms. It's like nobody knew what was up, right? And, on the one hand, you could say like, oh, okay, so it's like Wild West, but it actually wasn't really like, because the problem was like a startup could come and find themselves breaking the law without even knowing, And I think what that ultimately leads to is not people being like, oh, cool, this is like a blank slate. It leads people to be like, you know what, like this jurisdiction is actually really scary because like, I don't even know if I'm doing something wrong. And I kind of like what you said, like, is that bill going to come to me in 5 years, or is the SEC going to come knocking on my door when I thought I was being okay? I'm just going to go to Singapore, So I guess like in that sense, like, sometimes people are like, oh no, regulation is coming. But you see, I mean, to the extent that you can ever really explain what's happening with Bitcoin's price. Often when you see a movement from the US, like moving towards regulation, it actually the market seems to respond positively. Like, for example, like there was just an executive order on cryptocurrency. Now, the executive order was
didn't understand what that was, by the way.
That's fine. No, there's not, because it didn't really say, the executive order was like, let's study crypto more. I mean, that's basically what it said. It wasn't actually like telling anyone to do anything specific. It was more just like, it was telling people to like kind of learn more about this. So
it indicates at least that the US is interested in adopting it and legislating it as opposed to
100%.
Okay.
100%. Right. So I think it was seen as like the US. First of all, I don't think the US was ever going to ban cryptocurrency, but that was a thing that people would say sometimes, like it's going to get banned. But like, okay, they're not going to ban it if they're like putting this much effort into it. That was part of it.
I also think there's an element that if you are going to maintain your status as a international hub of financial transactions, you can't look at a technology like this and stifle it. You have to adopt and allow it if you want to keep yourself in that kind of traffic hotspot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think that's very much. So the US uses a lot of like kind of language like that. It's like, how do we balance risk with like out stifling innovation? So they get it. Like they see that like, and also it's just like the US is really going to sit this out. Like, no, it's going to happen all over the world. And, there's so much energy in startup innovation. And like, I think the US government, there's a lot of, different views in it. Like, I think there's people in the US government who are very pro crypto. There's people who are very like wary of crypto. There's people who have no idea what it is, So I think the other thing about the executive order that was seen as like positive is that it was like, okay, well now maybe more people in the government will like understand what this is, because it's actually dangerous if people don't understand what it is. Because
especially if they're legislating it, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's like there was a whole thing with like the infrastructure bill. It's kind of very technical. I'm not going to get into it, but like there was a whole thing where like there were some clauses in there that didn't really make sense for crypto and could have had a really bad effect on crypto and could have actually led to parts of the crypto industry leaving the US for good. Because it seems like maybe the people who wrote it didn't really think through all the different aspects of it. So so the executive order, it's like, okay, A, they're not banning it. B, they're taking time they're going to try to understand it better. And C, there was nothing in it that was like bad, right? Or nothing in it that was like, you can't do this, you can't do that. It didn't have any like negative kind of thing. It was just more like, we're going to sort of, let's take this more seriously. So those things were seen, but like, I think, some people would be like, oh, regulation, like that's scary. But no, in general, I think like the markets, like when regulation, regulatory clarity is generally seen as a positive thing. Even if it means that there's going to be more rules, it's probably better. And you phrased it really well just now. Like, it's like, yeah, because people could just end up breaking the law by accident or, or getting ripped off or getting scammed or, so.
And I guess people in general don't like to be a part of something that doesn't, at least on the surface, seem like it's welcomed and legislated by their local authority. Like, if I was going to talk to my nan, for example, I'm sure she'd be like, "Oh, that sounds dodgy because
sure.
there's no one you can talk to, or you could get scammed." And I guess as we think about this episode, and there's so many things that we're going to have to do other episodes about in the future. But like one thing that I'm looking to round off on from your perspective is you've traveled a lot. You understand a lot about different markets. You've been a part of kind of being a key journalistic force in this market for quite some time now, especially with your position with CoinDesk. What's your advice to someone who might still feel a little bit wary about crypto, what's going on? What would you say to people who haven't yet taken a step in and they're interested in it, they might be a bit scared in it, they're worried about what's happening in China and Russia? Like, what's your advice to people like that?
Well, I think there's so much educational content around, so just like learn about it, And I think the thing about crypto is like you can experiment in it in a pretty low risk way. Like you don't have to buy one Bitcoin, you can buy fractions. And I think like, look, my view, and obviously I'm, biased about this, but I don't think this technology is going away. And I don't think this is disappearing anytime soon. So the sooner you understand it and the sooner you have hands-on experience with it, and the best way to understand it is getting hands-on experience. So I would say like, yeah, like dabble in it. Like, like buy a little bit that is not going to hurt you in any way financially, just to kind of get a sense of like how this works and what it is. That's kind of the best way to learn about it. And, understanding that it's risky and volatile. But again, you can buy a tiny, tiny fraction of these coins, money that is not something that is going to cause you any kind of distress if you lose it. Always, I mean, I think with crypto is always, be prepared to lose what you put in, right? So I think that's, always something that people should be aware of, that, it's. And
I feel it's just important that it's like the lesson is more how to utilize the technology,
right.
Isn't it? It's like, even if you've got $5, get someone just functionally understand how does that system
exactly
how does
right.
that
You
system
can
work?
do it with a very small amount, and just like try to at least learn about it is what I would say. I don't think everybody has to be converted to crypto. I don't think everybody has to use crypto. I don't think everybody has to invest in crypto. If you're not into crypto, that's cool. Like, that's the great thing, right? There are many other options, but I do think like learning about it makes sense.
The knowledge base is important.
Yeah, because again, it's just going to become a bigger and bigger part of the story. It already is such a big part of the story. So just sort of being like, I don't understand it, or it doesn't relate to me, or it has no relevance in my life, I think that's going to get harder and harder to do that. So I would just say, like, that's my advice to people. Just learn about it. That's it. You don't have to be into it. You could learn about it and decide, like, I don't want anything to do with this. That's cool. But like, at least just like, at least come at that from a more informed perspective. Like, just sort of being like, this is for criminals, or this is for, I mean, that's not quite accurate. So,
well, also, one thing that I sound like a broken record whenever I talk to people about the topic of, people always ask me, what coin's this? What coin's that? It's like, I don't know. No one knows. Like, both me and you, I think we're very straight up. Like, and a shout out to everyone listening, that anyone ever that tells you that they like know what direction price movements happen, it's bullshit.
Or they know why. They're like, Bitcoin went up because
it's completely perspective investments, and the last thing you ever want to do is take financial advice from anyone, including me and including Emily, as educated and as in the space as you are, and as much as I've been in the space. The honest truth is no one knows, no one has a clue. It's all perspective, and understanding that is another really, really important thing. And I'll ask you a tricky question, because on the note of the fact that no one should ever take financial advice from a YouTube video, are there projects that you're looking at that you think, this project's interesting to me because of X? Is there anything that you pick up?
I don't know if there's like, I'm pretty neutral, just because I see, so like I'm a TV anchor. So every day we have like, different guests coming through. So you kind of hear everything,
So do you trade day to day because you're getting so much information, or are you a hodler?
I wouldn't say I trade day to day. No, I'm pretty much in this for the longer term.
Because that speaks volumes. The fact that you are doing your anchor work, you're getting so much information from the ground every day, yet you still choose to hodl, to have your investments and to leave it. You don't go and play that game of trying to guess the price movements.
Well, I mean, I think that's the other thing, though, when you've been in it for a long time and you see how things fluctuate and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's just, I think everybody has different points of view, but for me, like, taking a longer term view, you tend to see cycles more. Like, sometimes people get like so excited about a price jump and they'll get so upset when it crashes, and it's like, okay, I've seen various versions of this. But the point is that, like, I just talk to so many different people and so many different projects, and I wouldn't say that there's like any one in particular. I try to keep, you can generally tell sometimes, like, who seems a little bit more sincere, I guess. That comes through, just like who's really kind of in it for something bigger. And that sometimes you can tell just when you talk to like a lot of different people. So,
all right, and last question before we wrap up: what do you make of these metaverse spaces? Like, I'm getting involved in Decentraland now. I'm involved in Sandbox. I'm building spaces. Like, find it very interesting. I have no idea whether this is going to go to zero in a few months, or whether these plots of land are going to be worth a fortune. What's your take on metaverse?
I think the metaverse is super interesting. I like it in theory. I get it in theory. I still think that at the current moment, it's a little more of a vision than a reality, right? I mean, wouldn't you say that? Like, I don't think like the promise is huge, but in my experience, the actual user experience is not really there yet, right? So like, so that's like the thing about metaverse. Like, I sometimes meet people who are like investing in metaverse projects, and I'm always just like, how do you even know? Because like the product that you're looking at now, I mean, it's probably doesn't look that cool, right? It's all based on like a promise and a vision. And I think the promise and the vision are exciting for sure, but like the actual experience right now, I don't know, it just seems like kind of frustrating, kind of expensive, kind of buggy. That's I mean, I haven't gone into it like as much as you have, but like, yeah, it's a little frustrating. I mean, this is true just for VR also, like, you know, like VR is something that's like super cool, but like the actual VR experience, the headset experience is like pretty far from like, I think where it will be eventually. So,
I mean, I've got to say, I think you've nailed that. Like my investments are very prospective. And also I think for me, similar to what you advised about the Bitcoin stuff is like, I'm getting into it because I want to learn how to build spaces. I want to learn how do I build like a concert venue? How do I do like a performance as a music artist in this space? So like, yeah, Decentraland Sandbox, they're very, very basic.
Yeah.
But I think that it's very much promising a lot. And I do think that buying these spaces or investing into the construction of it, my hope is that in that 5 to 10 year period, when graphics engines are catching up, when the bandwidth of our mobile web is catching up, yeah, I think you're spot on. Right now, I'm feeling like I'm on shaky ground for sure.
I mean, it means you have like a great
goes.
Imagination and like a vision and a conviction, right? Because like I think to be actively invested in the metaverse right now, it's like, yeah, you have to have like a vision of like what this will become as opposed to like what it is now. It's like you're investing in something that is not the actual thing yet.
I also think that whenever I have watched humans do things, I think like Ethereum's a great example. It's like they made Ethereum, non-fungible token. It's like, okay, but no one would have thought about the human engine and the human ingenuity that was going to come to play and create like these projects. And then there's the communities, and then there's the value that they give the communities, and then the social engine that then powers the economy of those villages, almost like digital villages. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't even think the value that we're going to see in these things has even been made yet.
Right.
I reckon. I mean, I got involved in Sandbox and Decentraland. I would fully expect those things maybe to go to near zero in the next couple of years. But I also would fully expect that it could be, you know, $1 million a parcel. Like it's so wide open. And more to your advice, I'm not in a position where I will, you know, suffer horrendously if it does go to zero. I've gone in prepared, but I also wanted to learn to use the technology.
That's
I wanted
the
to
best
learn,
way to do it.
Yeah, and especially with my company and the things we do, being able to build digital spaces, I think will be an interesting service. I actually think one of the most in-demand jobs in 10 years is going to be like virtual, like what do you call it, project management or like event management. I don't know, I can see it, but it's exciting. I'm really happy to get your take on all this for sure.
Thank you.
I've got to say, Emily Parker, it has been a pleasure. Do you want to do this again sometime?
Sure.
Because I feel like this has been a really good introduction to everything you do. I'm looking forward to seeing as this world develops. Your opinion is always so grounded, so leveled. So I just want to say thank you for joining me on COVID Talk, and I will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Rock and roll.